The taste of copper filled my mouth when I first saw the alien fleet emerge from the warp near Cadia's outer perimeter. My name is Inquisitor Thaddeus Vorn, Ordo Xenos, and in 2 centuries of hunting humanity's enemies, I had never encountered vessels that defied every classification in Imperial databases. They called themselves the Rebel Alliance, refugees from a galaxy where their emperor had fallen to corruption, seeking sanctuary from an endless war against tyranny. You think that makes them allies, but you don't understand what I discovered in their interrogation chambers. These rebels wielded power they called the Force, psychic abilities without warp corruption, technology that exceeded Dark Age standards, and most disturbing of all, absolute conviction that the Imperium itself was the evil they had fled across impossible distances to escape. The question isn't whether such beings could survive our galaxy. I've seen Mon Mothma's tactical genius dissect our battle plans like a child's puzzle. The question is whether the Imperium can survive them. This is my testimony of hope corrupted into heresy. Chapter 1. First contact at Cadia's edge. The alert klaxons of Cadia's orbital defense grid had been screaming for 17 minutes when I received the priority vox from Lord Castellan Ursarkar Creed himself. The fortress world that guarded the Eye of Terror against chaos incursions had detected ships emerging from the warp using signatures that matched no known Imperial, Chaos, or Xenos technology in our comprehensive threat databases. Inquisitor Vorn. Creed's gravelly voice carried the strain of someone who had spent decades watching humanity's enemies emerge from the Eye of Terror with fresh horrors. We need Ordo Xenos expertise immediately. These ships, they're not like anything we've encountered before. No chaos corruption detected, no obvious alien physiological markers, but their technology exceeds our understanding in ways that suggest they come from somewhere very far away. I stood in the observation deck of the orbital fortress Vigilant Guardian, watching through reinforced adamantium viewports as the alien fleet maintained position at the edge of Cadia's defensive perimeter. Through magnoculars enhanced with blessed machine spirits, I could see vessel designs that combined elegant curves with functional efficiency in ways that challenged Imperial understanding of proper spacecraft architecture. The ships were beautiful in a manner that Imperial doctrine taught was inherently suspicious. Where Imperial vessels displayed the brutal functionality of consecrated war machines, these craft showed aesthetic consideration that suggested civilizations with time and resources to devote to artistic expression. More disturbing was their obvious technological sophistication, energy signatures that indicated power generation beyond Imperial capabilities, defensive fields that operated according to unfamiliar principles, and weapon systems that remained powered but non-threatening in ways that suggested confidence rather than weakness. Tech Adept Corvanis. I addressed the senior Mechanicus representative assigned to analyze the alien technology. What preliminary assessment can you provide regarding their capabilities? The Tech Adept's optical sensors whirred as they focused on data streaming from Cadia's most sophisticated scanning equipment. Inquisitor, the energy readings are unprecedented. These vessels appear to utilize power generation that approaches theoretical maximum efficiency for matter energy conversion. Their shield technology operates on principles that don't correspond to known Imperial or alien defensive systems. Corvanis manipulated his interface mechadendrites to display holographic representations of the alien vessels. Most significantly, their propulsion systems show no evidence of warp drive technology, yet they clearly achieved faster-than-light travel to reach this system. They appear to have developed alternative methods for interstellar navigation that don't require exposure to the immaterium. The implications were staggering. Every spacefaring civilization that the Imperium had encountered relied on warp travel for faster-than-light movement, exposing their vessels and crews to the corrupting influence of chaos entities that inhabited the realm of souls. If these aliens had indeed developed alternative FTL technology, it suggested scientific advancement that exceeded anything achieved during humanity's dark age of technology. Inquisitor, reported Captain Mordian of the Cadian 47th Shock Troops, his weathered features reflecting decades of experience identifying threats to Imperial security. We're receiving communication attempts on multiple frequencies. The transmissions are in low Gothic, but with linguistic patterns that suggest speakers who learned our language from secondary sources. The fact that unknown aliens possess knowledge of Imperial languages was deeply concerning from a security perspective. Such information could only have been obtained through contact with Imperial personnel, captured communications, or intelligence gathering that suggested surveillance capabilities exceeding our detection methods. "Patch the communication through," I ordered, activating recording equipment that would capture every nuance of the exchange for later analysis by Imperial experts in xenolinguistics and threat assessment. The voice that emerged from the Vox speakers carried an accent that reminded me of ancient Terran dialects preserved in the oldest archives, but with inflections that suggested someone who had learned Imperial Gothic through study rather than cultural immersion. "Imperial vessels, this is Admiral Ackbar of the Rebel Alliance fleet. We come seeking sanctuary and possible alliance against the forces of tyranny that threaten both our peoples." The claim of seeking alliance was immediately suspicious from an Ordo Xenos perspective. In 2 centuries of hunting humanity's enemies, I had learned that aliens who approached Imperial space with offers of cooperation typically possessed ulterior motives that involved exploitation or infiltration of human civilization. "Unknown vessel," I replied through Cadia's primary communication array. "You are in violation of Imperial space and will submit to immediate boarding and inspection. Any resistance will be considered an act of war against the Imperium of man." The pause that followed lasted perhaps 10 seconds, but I could detect increased communication activity between the alien vessels as they apparently consulted regarding their response to Imperial demands. When the reply came, it carried tones that suggested confusion rather than hostility. "Imperial Commander, we apologize for any territorial violation. Our navigation systems detected this region as uninhabited space, and we were not aware that we had entered sovereign territory. We are willing to submit to inspection if you can guarantee the safety of our personnel and respect for our rights as sentient beings." The concept of rights as sentient beings was alien to Imperial doctrine in ways that revealed fundamental philosophical differences between their civilization and ours. Imperial law recognized the Emperor's subjects as having specific duties and protections based on their service to humanity, but the idea that non-human entities possessed inherent rights was heretical according to established xenological doctrine. "Tech Adept Corvanis," I whispered, ensuring that my words wouldn't be transmitted to the alien fleet. "What analysis can you provide of their communication patterns and linguistic capabilities?" The language usage suggests highly educated speakers with access to comprehensive databases of Imperial cultural and linguistic information, Corvanis replied through internal Vox. However, their conceptual frameworks indicate civilization that developed along different philosophical lines than Imperial society. They appear to operate according to principles that prioritize individual autonomy and collective decision-making. The political implications that Corvanis was identifying suggested alien civilization whose governing structures would be fundamentally incompatible with Imperial authority. Societies that prioritized individual autonomy over collective service typically proved unable to maintain the discipline necessary for survival in a galaxy filled with entities that sought humanity's destruction. "Alien vessels," I transmitted, "you will power down all weapon systems and prepare to receive Imperial boarding parties. Any attempt to withdraw or resist inspection will result in immediate destruction." "Understood, Imperial Commander," came the reply, though I detected undertones that suggested the aliens were complying under protest rather than genuine acceptance of Imperial authority. "Our shields are being lowered and weapons powered down. However, we request permission to send our own diplomatic representatives to establish proper communication protocols." The request for diplomatic exchange was another indication of alien naivety regarding the realities of galactic politics. Imperial doctrine held that proper communication between human and alien civilizations consisted of the aliens accepting human authority or facing destruction. Concepts like diplomatic negotiation implied equality between species that Imperial theology explicitly rejected. "Lord Castellan Creed," I addressed the Fortress World's commanding officer through Priority Vox. "I recommend immediate deployment of boarding parties equipped for xenological analysis and potential combat operations. These aliens appear peaceful, but their technology levels and political concepts suggest they could pose significant threats if their intentions prove hostile. Boarding parties are already prepared, Inquisitor, Creed replied with the efficiency that had made him one of the Imperium's most capable military commanders. Stormtroopers with full xenological protocols, accompanied by tech priests for equipment analysis and astropaths for detecting possible psychic threats. The boarding operation that followed was conducted with the thoroughness that Imperial doctrine demanded when confronting unknown alien threats. 6 Valkyrie assault carriers transported 48 Cadian stormtroopers, 12 tech priests, and 3 astropaths to the largest alien vessel, their equipment blessed against corruption and their minds prepared for whatever horrors might await discovery. Boarding teams report successful docking, announced Captain Mordian as tactical information streamed through Cadia's command center. No resistance encountered, and alien personnel appear to be cooperating fully with inspection procedures. The initial reports from the boarding teams painted a picture that challenged every assumption I had developed about alien civilizations. Rather than the predatory hostility or manipulative deception typical of Xenos contact, the aliens demonstrated what appeared to be genuine cooperation and concern for the safety of Imperial personnel. Inquisitor, reported Sergeant Voss, leader of the primary boarding team. The alien vessel's interior is unlike anything in our threat assessment databases. Clean, well lit, with living areas that suggest they actually care about the comfort of their personnel. No obvious weapon systems in corridors, no defensive positions, no evidence of hostile intent. The description that Voss was providing contradicted standard Imperial expectations for alien vessel architecture. Xenos ships typically emphasized functionality over comfort, with design elements that reflected either predatory aggression or cold calculation. Vessels that prioritized crew comfort suggested civilizations with resources and inclination to invest in quality of life, rather than pure military efficiency. More significantly, Voss continued, we've encountered several humans among the alien crew. They claim to be refugees from Imperial space who joined the aliens voluntarily, seeking escape from what they describe as Imperial tyranny. The presence of human personnel aboard alien vessels raised immediate concerns about heretical collaboration and possible corruption of Imperial citizens. Such individuals would require extensive interrogation to determine whether they pose security threats or could provide valuable intelligence about alien capabilities and intentions. Bring the human collaborators to Cadia immediately, I ordered, recognizing that their testimony would be critical for understanding the true nature of the threat these aliens might represent. Full inquisitorial interrogation protocols, with preparation for possible execution if they prove to be corrupted or treasonous. Understood, Inquisitor, Voss replied. However, I should note that these humans appear to be in excellent physical and psychological condition. No signs of alien corruption, coercion, or indoctrination. They speak of the aliens as liberators who freed them from Imperial oppression. The political implications of what Voss was reporting were deeply disturbing from an Imperial security perspective. If these aliens were indeed recruiting Imperial citizens through propaganda about liberation from oppression, they represented a threat that went beyond simple military conflict to encompass ideological subversion of Imperial authority. Tech Adept Corvanis, I addressed the Mechanicus representative. What preliminary analysis can you provide of the alien technology encountered during boarding operations? The technological sophistication exceeds Imperial capabilities in several key areas, Corvanis replied, after consulting data transmitted by the boarding teams. Their computer systems operate according to principles that suggest artificial intelligence development beyond anything achieved during the dark age of technology. However, there are no signs of chaos corruption or malevolent machine spirits. The presence of advanced artificial intelligence aboard alien vessels was concerning from both technological and theological perspectives. Imperial doctrine held that uncontrolled AI development led inevitably to corruption and rebellion against human authority. Yet these aliens appeared to have achieved AI advancement without such negative consequences. Most remarkably, Corvanis continued, several alien personnel demonstrate what appear to be psychic abilities, but without any detectable connection to the warp. They manipulate matter and energy through means that don't correspond to known psychic capabilities. The existence of psychic abilities that operated independently of the warp challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness and supernatural power. If these aliens had indeed developed psychic capabilities without exposure to chaos corruption, it suggested possibilities for human development that Imperial doctrine had never considered. Inquisitor Vorn came a new transmission from the alien fleet, this time from a different speaker whose voice carried authority that suggested senior leadership. I am Mon Mothma, Supreme Commander of the Rebel Alliance. I understand that our arrival has caused concern for your authorities. I would like to request formal diplomatic contact to explain our situation and explore possibilities for mutual cooperation. The request for diplomatic contact with someone claiming Supreme Command authority indicated that these aliens operated according to hierarchical structures that might be compatible with Imperial governance. However, the title Rebel Alliance suggested that their civilization was organized around opposition to established authority, which could pose ideological threats to Imperial stability. Supreme Commander Mon Mothma, I replied, recognizing that direct communication with alien leadership would provide the best opportunity for assessing their true capabilities and intentions. I am Inquisitor Thaddeus Vorn of the Ordo Xenos. I will meet with you aboard my vessel to discuss your situation, but you should understand that the Imperium's tolerance for alien presence in human space is extremely limited. I understand, Inquisitor, Mon Mothma replied, her voice carrying diplomatic skill that suggested extensive experience with interspecies negotiation. I believe that once you understand our situation, you will recognize that our goals and yours may be more compatible than initial contact suggests. As I prepared for what might be the most significant xenological contact in Imperial history, I reflected on the implications of encountering aliens whose technology, psychology, and political organization challenged every assumption about non-human civilization. Whether these rebels represented opportunity or threat remained to be determined, but I was certain that their presence would test the Imperium's capacity for adaptation in ways that had never been previously required. The galaxy was about to become far more complicated than Imperial doctrine had prepared us to handle. Chapter 2: The Mon Mothma Interrogation. The diplomatic meeting took place aboard the Inquisition vessel, Eternal Vigilance, in a chamber specifically designed for xenological contact that could be sealed and purged with extreme prejudice if the aliens proved treacherous. Mon Mothma entered flanked by 2 escorts, a tall humanoid whose bearing suggested military background, and a smaller figure whose robes reminded me uncomfortably of psyker garments from ancient Terran traditions. Mon Mothma herself defied every expectation I had developed regarding alien leadership during 2 centuries of xenological experience. Where most non-human commanders displayed either predatory aggression or cold calculation, she radiated what could only be described as maternal authority combined with steel-hard determination. Her age was difficult to estimate, but she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected millions of lives. Inquisitor Vorn, she said, her pronunciation of Imperial Gothic nearly flawless, despite the slight accent that marked her as someone who had learned our language through study rather than cultural immersion. I appreciate your willingness to meet despite what must be significant concerns about our unexpected arrival. I gestured toward the reinforced chairs that had been positioned to provide optimal observation angles while maintaining safe distance from potential threats. Supreme Commander, my primary concern is determining whether your presence represents a threat to Imperial security and human civilization. Your claims of seeking sanctuary suggest that you are refugees, but your technological capabilities and military organization indicate potential for significant disruption if your intentions prove hostile. Mon Mothma settled into her chair with grace that suggested aristocratic background, while her escorts remained standing in positions that provided protection without appearing overtly threatening. Inquisitor, we are indeed refugees, though our situation is more complex than simple displacement. We come from a galaxy where a tyrannical emperor achieved absolute power through deception and the corruption of democratic institutions. For decades, we fought to restore freedom and justice to our people. The political concepts that Mon Mothma was describing were deeply troubling from an Imperial perspective. The idea that opposition to Imperial authority could be justified through appeals to freedom and justice represented exactly the kind of heretical thinking that had led to countless rebellions throughout Imperial history. "You describe your emperor as tyrannical," I observed, activating recording equipment that would capture every nuance of the conversation for later analysis. "Yet you must understand that the Imperium of Man is also governed by an emperor whose authority is absolute. How do you reconcile seeking sanctuary in another Imperial system?" Mon Mothma's expression showed surprise that suggested she had not fully understood the nature of Imperial governance before arriving in our galaxy. "Inquisitor, our intelligence regarding your civilization was limited to fragments obtained through long-range observation. We were not aware that your emperor maintained the same absolute authority that we opposed in our own galaxy. The admission that they possessed long-range observation capabilities sufficient to detect our galaxy from theirs was deeply concerning from a security perspective. Such intelligence gathering suggested technological capabilities that far exceeded anything in Imperial databases, while raising questions about how long they had been monitoring human civilization. "Describe this long-range observation capability," I demanded, recognizing that their surveillance technology might represent either valuable intelligence asset or significant threat to Imperial security. "Our Jedi possessed abilities that enabled them to perceive events across vast distances through what we call the Force," Mon Mothma replied, gesturing toward the robed figure who had accompanied her to the meeting. "Master Luke Skywalker detected the presence of your galaxy and identified it as a potential sanctuary from the corruption that had consumed our own civilization." The mention of the Force as a source of long-range perception abilities immediately triggered my training in detecting psyker activity and potential warp corruption. Yet the astropaths who had scanned the alien fleet reported no detectable psychic emanations from these Jedi, suggesting that their abilities operated according to principles unknown to Imperial science. "This force," I said carefully, "describe its nature and limitations. Imperial doctrine requires comprehensive understanding of any psychic phenomena that might pose threats to human civilization." The robed figure, whom Mon Mothma had identified as Luke Skywalker, stepped forward, his movement carrying the fluid grace typical of highly trained combatants. "Inquisitor, the Force is the energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, and binds the galaxy together. Those sensitive to the Force can perceive it, and with training, learn to influence matter and energy through focused concentration." The description that Skywalker was providing sounded suspiciously similar to psyker abilities, yet the astropaths continued to report no detectable warp emanations from either him or his companions. If these aliens had indeed developed psychic capabilities without connection to the Imperium, it represented a discovery that would revolutionize Imperial understanding of consciousness and supernatural power. "Demonstrate this ability," I ordered, recognizing that direct observation would provide more useful intelligence than theoretical descriptions. Skywalker nodded and extended his hand toward a stylus that rested on the table between us. Without any visible effort or incantation, the stylus rose into the air and began moving in complex patterns that demonstrated precise control over gravitational forces. Most remarkably, the astropath monitoring the meeting reported no psychic disturbance accompanying the demonstration. "Fascinating," I admitted, though my training demanded that I remain suspicious of phenomena that operated outside established Imperial understanding. "Your abilities appear genuine, but the mechanisms involved challenge everything our science teaches about psychic power and its relationship to darker forces." "What darker forces do you mean?" Mon Mothma asked, her expression suggesting genuine concern about implications she didn't fully understand. "In our galaxy, psychic abilities are channeled through a realm we call the Warp, which is inhabited by entities that seek to corrupt and possess those who wield such power," I explained, recognizing that these aliens might genuinely be unaware of the dangers they courted through psychic development. Even our most carefully trained psychers require constant vigilance to avoid corruption by these entities. The horror that crossed Mon Mothma's features suggested that she was beginning to understand why Imperial doctrine treated psychic abilities with such caution. Inquisitor, our Force users have never encountered such entities. The Force is inherently connected to life and growth rather than corruption and decay. The entities we call demons are masters of deception, I warned, though I was beginning to suspect that these aliens' psychic abilities might indeed operate according to different principles than those familiar to Imperial science. They often present themselves as benevolent forces while gradually corrupting those who trust them. Luke Skywalker's expression showed deep concern as he processed the implications of what I was describing. Inquisitor, if such entities exist in your galaxy, it would explain much about the darkness we have sensed since our arrival. The Force itself feels different here, more turbulent, with currents of anger and hatred that we never encountered in our own galaxy. The observation that these aliens could detect the influence of chaos corruption through their Force abilities suggested that they might prove valuable in identifying threats that normal Imperial personnel couldn't perceive. However, it also raised questions about their own vulnerability to corruption if they remained in our galaxy for extended periods. Supreme Commander, I said, addressing Mon Mothma directly, you claim to be refugees seeking sanctuary, but your technological capabilities and military organization suggest that you could pose significant threats if your intentions prove hostile. What assurances can you provide that your presence won't destabilize Imperial security? Mon Mothma leaned forward, her expression conveying sincerity that seemed genuine despite my training to remain suspicious of alien deception. Inquisitor, our rebellion was born from opposition to tyranny and oppression. We have no desire to impose our will on others or to destabilize legitimate governments. Our only goal is to find a place where our people can live in peace and freedom. Yet you describe the Imperium's emperor as holding the same absolute authority that you opposed in your own galaxy, I pointed out. How can you seek sanctuary in a system whose governance you apparently consider tyrannical? Our understanding of your civilization was incomplete, Mon Mothma admitted. We detected signs of a vast human civilization and assumed that it operated according to principles similar to the democratic systems we sought to restore. Learning that your emperor wields absolute authority raises complications. The political implications of what Mon Mothma was revealing suggested that these aliens might indeed pose ideological threats to Imperial stability if they attempted to spread their concepts of democracy and individual freedom among Imperial citizens. Such ideas had historically led to rebellion and chaos that weakened humanity's ability to survive in a hostile galaxy. Your presence has already been detected by Imperial citizens who describe you as liberators, I observed, citing the reports from the boarding teams. How do you explain the defection of Imperial personnel to your cause? The humans who joined us did so voluntarily, after learning about alternatives to the oppression they experienced under Imperial rule, Mon Mothma replied. We offered them nothing more than the opportunity to live as free beings rather than subjects of absolute authority. The casual way that Mon Mothma described subverting Imperial authority revealed fundamental misunderstanding of the necessity for absolute discipline in a galaxy filled with threats that sought humanity's destruction. Her civilization's democratic ideals might have functioned in their own galaxy, but such principles were incompatible with the realities of surviving against chaos, Xenos, and heretical threats. Supreme Commander, you must understand that Imperial authority exists to protect humanity from threats that would destroy any civilization lacking absolute unity, I explained, hoping to convey the practical necessities that justified Imperial governance. Democracy and individual freedom are luxuries that humanity cannot afford in a galaxy where survival requires perfect coordination and discipline. Yet we survived for millennia without absolute authority, Mon Mothma countered. Our democratic systems enabled us to resist tyranny and maintain the alliances necessary for ultimately defeating the empire that oppressed our people. The claim that democratic systems could provide effective resistance to tyrannical authority was interesting from a tactical perspective, though it contradicted Imperial doctrine regarding the necessity for hierarchical command structures. If these aliens had indeed achieved military victory through democratic organization, It suggested possibilities that Imperial strategists had never seriously considered. "Describe your military capabilities," I demanded, recognizing that understanding their combat potential would be critical for assessing the threat they might pose if diplomatic contact failed. The third member of Mon Mothma's party stepped forward, the tall humanoid whose bearing had suggested military background. "I am General Han Solo, former smuggler, current military advisor to the Rebel Alliance. Our fleet includes approximately 400 capital ships, 2,000 support vessels, and fighter contingents totaling about 50,000 individual craft." The numbers that Solo was providing represented a military force capable of challenging entire Imperial sector fleets, though their true capabilities would depend on technological advantages and tactical coordination rather than simple numerical strength. More concerning was the casual manner in which he revealed such sensitive intelligence, suggesting either naivety about security protocols or confidence that their military strength made such information irrelevant. "Your willingness to reveal military capabilities suggests either foolishness or supreme confidence in your ability to defend against Imperial response," I observed. "Which interpretation should I draw?" "Neither, Inquisitor," Solo replied, with what appeared to be genuine honesty. "We're revealing our capabilities because we hope to convince you that we're neither helpless refugees nor conquering invaders. We're a military force capable of defending ourselves, but with no interest in aggressive action against your people." The political sophistication that Solo was demonstrating suggested that these aliens understood the delicate balance required for maintaining peace while possessing significant military capabilities. However, their democratic ideals and recruitment of Imperial defectors indicated that their mere presence might destabilize Imperial authority through ideological influence rather than direct military action. "Inquisitor," Mon Mothma interjected, "we understand that our arrival has created complications for your authorities. We are willing to negotiate relocation to uninhabited regions where our presence won't threaten Imperial territory or citizens." The offer to relocate to uninhabited space was tactically sound from their perspective, but it would create ongoing security concerns for Imperial forces responsible for monitoring potentially hostile alien presence. Moreover, their technological capabilities might enable them to establish hidden bases or infrastructure that could pose future threats. "Relocation would be a temporary solution at best," I replied. "Your presence in this galaxy represents fundamental challenges to Imperial doctrine and security. Long-term coexistence would require either your complete integration into Imperial society or your departure to regions beyond our sphere of influence. Integration into Imperial society would require abandoning the principles for which we fought our rebellion," Mon Mothma observed. "We cannot accept absolute authority or the suppression of individual freedom that your system appears to require." The fundamental incompatibility between their democratic ideals and Imperial governance was becoming clear through our diplomatic exchange. These aliens might genuinely seek peaceful coexistence, but their political philosophy represented exactly the kind of heretical thinking that Imperial doctrine was designed to prevent. As our meeting continued, I began to realize that these rebels represented a threat unlike any that Imperial xenological doctrine had prepared us to address. They possessed superior technology, sophisticated military organization, and most dangerously, political ideals that could undermine Imperial authority through ideological subversion rather than direct conquest. Whether the Imperium could adapt to such challenges without compromising the absolute authority necessary for humanity's survival remained to be determined. But I was beginning to suspect that Mon Mothma and her rebels might represent the most sophisticated threat Imperial civilization had ever encountered. Chapter 3: Jedi Among the Stars. The demonstration of Luke Skywalker's abilities that followed Mon Mothma's diplomatic presentation challenged everything Imperial doctrine taught about the nature of psychic power and its relationship to corruption. In the reinforced testing chamber aboard Eternal Vigilance, surrounded by equipment designed to detect and contain the most dangerous psychomanifestations, I watched the young Jedi manipulate matter and energy through means that defied every principle of warp-based psychic theory. "Master Skywalker," I began, using formal address protocols while maintaining safe distance from potential psychic contamination. Imperial science requires comprehensive analysis of your abilities before we can assess the threat level you might represent. I need you to demonstrate the full range of your capabilities while our equipment monitors for any signs of corruption or malevolent influence. Skywalker nodded with the calm confidence typical of individuals who had achieved mastery over dangerous abilities through extensive training. I understand your caution, Inquisitor. In our own galaxy, we learned that power without proper control can lead to terrible consequences. I'm willing to submit to whatever analysis you require. The astropath assigned to monitor the testing session was Epistolary Marcus Aurelius of the Grey Knights, one of the most powerful and disciplined psychers in Imperial service. His presence ensured that any manifestation of chaos corruption would be immediately detected and contained before it could spread to other personnel. Begin with basic telekinetic manipulation, I instructed, activating recording equipment that would document every aspect of the demonstration for later analysis by Imperial experts in psychic phenomena. Skywalker extended his hand toward a series of metal objects that had been arranged across the testing chamber, weights ranging from simple styluses to massive adamantium blocks that would require powered equipment for normal humans to move. Without any visible strain or incantation, the objects began rising into the air and moving in complex patterns that demonstrated precise control over gravitational forces. Remarkable, Epistolary Aurelius reported through our internal Vox network. I detect no psychic emanations whatsoever, no connection to the warp, no soul signature disturbance, no indication that he's channeling power through the Imperium. Yet the telekinetic effects are undeniably real and precisely controlled. The absence of warp connection in Skywalker's abilities was unprecedented in Imperial experience with psychic phenomena. Every psyker that Imperial science had studied drew power through the realm of souls, exposing them to corruption by the entities that inhabited that chaotic dimension. Yet this Jedi appeared to access supernatural power through some alternative source. Increase the complexity, I ordered, hoping to determine the limits of abilities that operated according to unknown principles. Skywalker began manipulating multiple objects simultaneously while maintaining conversation, demonstrating multitasking capabilities that exceeded even the most disciplined Imperial psychers. The metal objects formed intricate geometric patterns in the air while rotating around multiple axes, creating displays that would have required extensive calculation and concentration for normal humans to achieve. The Force flows through all living things, Skywalker explained while maintaining his telekinetic display. What you're seeing isn't power drawn from external sources, but harmony with the natural energy that connects all life in the galaxy. The philosophical framework that Skywalker was describing suggested fundamentally different understanding of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. Where Imperial doctrine taught that psychic power required dangerous communion with entities beyond normal space-time, Jedi philosophy apparently viewed supernatural abilities as natural expressions of life energy. Demonstrate precognitive abilities, I instructed, recognizing that prophecy and future sight were among the most dangerous psychic capabilities from a security perspective. Skywalker closed his eyes and extended his awareness in ways that reminded me of astropathic techniques. Yet Epistolary Aurelius continued to report no detectable psychic activity. After several moments of concentration, the Jedi opened his eyes with expression that suggested he had perceived something disturbing. Inquisitor, I sense great conflict approaching this system, Skywalker said, his voice carrying certainty that spoke to genuine prophetic ability. Ships bearing symbols of an 8-pointed star, crewed by beings consumed with rage and hatred. They come seeking something precious that was lost to them long ago. The description that Skywalker was providing matched intelligence reports regarding Chaos Space Marine warband movements in sectors adjacent to Cadia. If his precognitive abilities could indeed provide advance warning of Chaos incursions, it represented intelligence capability that could revolutionize Imperial defensive planning. When will this attack occur? I demanded, recognizing that advance warning of Chaos assault could save millions of Imperial lives. Soon, Skywalker replied, his expression troubled by visions that apparently disturbed him despite his training. Within days, perhaps hours, the future is difficult to see clearly because the attacking forces are wrong. They exist in states that create disturbances in the Force itself. The fact that Chaos entities created disturbances in Skywalker's Force perception suggested that his abilities might be compatible with Imperial defensive needs despite their alien origin. If Jedi could detect Chaos corruption and provide early warning of attacks, they might prove valuable allies regardless of their problematic political philosophy. Tech Adept Corvinus, I addressed the Mechanicus representative who was monitoring the equipment analysis. What readings are you detecting from the Jedi's abilities? The energy signatures are unlike anything in Imperial databases, Corvinus replied, his mechanical consciousness processing data that challenged established understanding of supernatural phenomena. There are no detectable warp fluctuations, no psychic resonance, no evidence of external power sources. Yet the gravitational and electromagnetic effects are measurably real. The tech adept manipulated his interface to display readings that showed energy patterns around Skywalker's position. Most remarkably, the energy signature appears to be enhancing the efficiency of nearby technology rather than disrupting it. Our monitoring equipment is operating at above normal performance levels while in proximity to his abilities. The technological enhancement that Corvinus was describing represented another unprecedented aspect of Jedi abilities. Where psychic powers typically interfered with machine spirits and technological systems, Skywalker's Force manipulation seemed to improve equipment performance in ways that suggested harmony rather than conflict between supernatural and technological capabilities. Demonstrate combat applications, I instructed, recognizing that understanding the Jedi's military potential would be critical for assessing the threat level his people might represent. Skywalker activated a device that I initially mistook for a standard power weapon, but which extended into a blade of pure energy that hummed with power unlike anything in Imperial arsenals. The weapon appeared to be constructed from technology that focused energy into coherent forms, without requiring the massive power systems typically associated with such devices. This is a lightsaber, Skywalker explained, demonstrating combat forms that combined exceptional physical conditioning with supernatural awareness of spatial relationships. It can cut through most materials, deflect energy weapons, and serves as focus for Force abilities during combat. The weapon demonstration that followed showcased capabilities that exceeded those of Imperial power weapons, while requiring none of the infrastructure typically necessary for energy blade technology. More impressive was Skywalker's ability to deflect projectiles fired by servo skulls, demonstrating reflexes that approached precognitive accuracy. The lightsaber is more than a weapon, Skywalker continued, using his energy blade to cut precise patterns in adamantium targets that should have required industrial equipment to achieve. It requires Force sensitivity to wield effectively because the weapon has no weight or physical mass. Only connection to the Force allows a user to sense the blade's position and control its movements. The integration of supernatural ability with advanced technology that Skywalker was demonstrating suggested civilizational development along paths that Imperial science had never explored. Rather than treating psychic power and technology as separate disciplines, Jedi training apparently combined both into unified capabilities that exceeded the sum of their parts. Master Skywalker, I said, beginning to formulate assessment of the strategic implications his abilities might represent. How many individuals in your civilization possess these Force abilities? True Jedi sensitivity is rare, Skywalker replied, deactivating his lightsaber and returning to the relaxed posture typical of someone completing routine training exercises. Perhaps 1 in a million individuals possess the potential for Force training, and fewer still achieve mastery sufficient for combat applications. The statistical rarity that Skywalker was describing meant that Jedi capabilities would be limited to small numbers of highly trained individuals rather than mass deployment of supernatural warriors. However, the demonstrated effectiveness of individual Jedi suggested that even small numbers could have significant tactical impact. However, Skywalker continued, Force sensitivity appears to be more common in your galaxy than in ours. I've detected several individuals among your personnel who show potential for Jedi training. though their abilities have been suppressed or corrupted by exposure to the dark currents that flow through this region of space. The claim that Imperial personnel possessed latent force sensitivity was deeply troubling from a security perspective. If Jedi training could indeed awaken supernatural abilities in individuals who had never displayed psychic potential, it represented a recruitment capability that could undermine Imperial control over psychic phenomena. Identify these individuals, I demanded, recognizing that anyone with supernatural potential required immediate assessment and possible containment to prevent corruption or unauthorized power development. Skywalker's expression showed reluctance that suggested he understood the implications of what he was revealing. Inquisitor, I can sense their potential, but identifying them would place them at risk if your authorities consider force sensitivity dangerous or heretical. All psychic ability is dangerous, I replied, explaining Imperial doctrine regarding the necessity for controlling supernatural power. Individuals with such potential must be identified, trained, or eliminated to prevent corruption that could spread to others. That approach explains much about the darkness I sense in your galaxy, Skywalker observed, his tone carrying sadness rather than accusation. Fear of supernatural ability has led to suppression of natural gifts that could be used to serve life and protect the innocent. The philosophical criticism that Skywalker was offering challenged fundamental assumptions about Imperial necessity for controlling psychic phenomena. Yet his demonstrated abilities suggested that alternative approaches to supernatural power might indeed be possible if the risks of corruption could be managed through different training methods. Your abilities are impressive, I admitted, but they represent potential threats that Imperial doctrine exists to prevent. How can you guarantee that Force users won't be corrupted by the malevolent entities that inhabit our galaxy? Jedi training emphasizes emotional discipline and connection to life rather than personal power, Skywalker explained. A Jedi who maintains proper mental state and commitment to protecting others would be naturally resistant to corruption by entities that feed on fear, anger, and selfish ambition. The training methodology that Skywalker was describing sounded similar to techniques used by the most disciplined Imperial psychers, though apparently without the constant vigilance against warp corruption that characterized sanctioned psyker education. If Jedi methods could indeed provide protection against chaos influence, they might represent improvements over current Imperial psychic training. Epistolary Aurelius, I addressed the Grey Knight who had been monitoring the demonstration. What assessment can you provide regarding the corruption potential of these abilities? The Jedi shows no signs of chaos, taint, or vulnerability to corrupting influence, Aurelius replied, his psychically enhanced senses providing evaluation that carried enormous weight regarding supernatural threats. His mental discipline appears genuine, and his abilities operate through principles that don't involve the kind of soul bargaining that makes psychers vulnerable to demonic possession. The assessment from one of the Imperium's most experienced demon hunters provided strong evidence that Jedi abilities might indeed represent safer alternatives to conventional psychic power. However, the political implications of such capabilities remained problematic regardless of their safety from corruption. Master Skywalker, I said, recognizing that the demonstration had provided as much information as could be safely gathered in a single session. Your abilities are remarkable and appear to pose minimal corruption risk. However, the political philosophy of your rebellion represents threats to Imperial stability that may outweigh any tactical advantages your capabilities might provide. I understand your concerns, Inquisitor, Skywalker replied with diplomatic skill that suggested training in handling complex political situations. However, I hope you'll consider that our commitment to protecting the innocent and opposing tyranny might make us natural allies despite philosophical differences about governance. The possibility of alliance with technologically superior aliens whose military capabilities exceeded Imperial standard forces was tempting from a strategic perspective. Yet their democratic ideals and recruitment of Imperial defectors suggested that their presence might ultimately prove more destabilizing than beneficial. As I reflected on the implications of what I had witnessed, I began to realize that these rebels represented challenges that went far beyond normal xenological threats. They offered both opportunities and dangers that would test the Imperium's capacity for adaptation in ways that no previous alien contact had required. Whether humanity could coexist with beings whose capabilities exceeded our own, while maintaining the absolute authority necessary for survival in a hostile galaxy, remained to be determined. Chapter 4. The Force meets the Warp. The crisis that Luke Skywalker had foreseen arrived 18 hours after his demonstration, when long-range augurs detected the emergence of a Chaos warband from the Eye of Terror. The Crimson Slaughter Space Marines, led by the Demon Prince Cranan the Relentless, had apparently tracked some artifact of power to the Cadia system and were approaching with a fleet that included 2 battle barges, 8 strike cruisers, and escort vessels numbering in the dozens. Inquisitor Vorn. Lord Castellan Creed's voice carried the tension of someone preparing for siege warfare against enemies whose capabilities exceeded normal human comprehension. We're implementing emergency defensive protocols and requesting immediate support from sector fleet reserves. However, the Crimson Slaughter's fleet composition suggests this assault will exceed our current defensive capabilities. I stood in Cadia's primary command center, watching tactical displays that showed the approaching Chaos forces with growing concern. The Crimson Slaughter were among the most dangerous Chaos Space Marine warbands, possessing combat experience and dark gifts that had allowed them to terrorize Imperial space for centuries. Their sudden interest in the Cadia system could only mean that they had detected something of significant value. Lord Castellan, what intelligence do we have regarding their objectives? I asked, recognizing that understanding enemy intentions would be critical for organizing effective defense. Astropathic intercepts suggest they're seeking something they describe as the key to unlocking the ancient chains, Creed replied, consulting reports that carried the highest classification levels. Intelligence believes they may be attempting to recover artifacts connected to the original Chaos assault on Cadia during the Horus Heresy. The implications were staggering. If the Crimson Slaughter had indeed located artifacts from the original Chaos assault on humanity's most critical fortress world, they might be planning operations that could destabilize Imperial defenses across the entire sector. Such artifacts typically possessed dark powers that could corrupt entire planetary populations or open new routes for demonic incursion. Mon Mothma, I addressed the Rebel Alliance leader through secure Vox. Your Jedi predicted this attack. Do his abilities provide any intelligence regarding enemy objectives or tactical capabilities? Luke senses that the approaching forces are seeking something connected to what he describes as a wound in the Force itself, Mon Mothma replied, her voice carrying concern that suggested her people understood the gravity of the situation, despite their limited knowledge of Chaos threats. He believes their success could result in catastrophic expansion of the dark corruption that already plagues this region of space. The description of Cadia as a wound in the Force was disturbing from multiple perspectives. If Jedi abilities could indeed detect the long-term effects of Chaos corruption on local space-time, it suggested that the Eye of Terror's influence was far more extensive than Imperial authorities had previously understood. Supreme Commander, I'm requesting immediate assistance from your fleet, I said, recognizing that the Rebel Alliance's technological superiority might be critical for defending against Chaos assault. Your forces may be our only chance for preventing the Crimson Slaughter from achieving objectives that could threaten the entire sector. Our ships are already moving to support positions, Mon Mothma replied without hesitation. General Solo is coordinating with your naval commanders to integrate our defensive capabilities with Imperial strategy. The willingness of the rebels to risk their lives defending Imperial territory, despite our philosophical differences, was remarkable from a diplomatic perspective. It suggested that their commitment to opposing tyranny and corruption was genuine rather than mere propaganda designed to justify their political objectives. Inquisitor, reported Captain Mordian from his position monitoring fleet movements. The rebel vessels are taking positions that maximize their defensive capabilities while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. Their tactical coordination exceeds anything in Imperial databases for alien fleet operations. The tactical sophistication that Captain Mordian was observing supported theories about rebel military capabilities that exceeded simple technological advantage. Their strategic thinking appeared to encompass combat principles that Imperial doctrine had never systematically developed. "First contact with Chaos Scouts in 30 minutes, announced the fleet commander through General Vox. "All vessels to battle stations. Emperor protects." "Inquisitor Vorn," Luke Skywalker's voice came through personal Vox. "I'm requesting permission to deploy to the combat zone with my lightsaber and force abilities. The enemy forces carry corruption that threatens more than just Imperial territory. Their success could spread darkness that would eventually consume both our civilizations." The request to deploy a Jedi in direct combat against Chaos Space Marines was unprecedented from both tactical and theological perspectives. While Skywalker's abilities had proven impressive during controlled demonstration, their effectiveness against enemies enhanced by demonic gifts remained untested. "Master Skywalker, Chaos Space Marines possess capabilities that exceed normal human comprehension," I warned, recognizing that the young Jedi might not fully understand the nature of the enemies he proposed to face. "They are enhanced beyond normal Space Marine capabilities through dark gifts that grant supernatural strength, speed, and resistance to conventional weapons." "I understand the risks, Inquisitor," Skywalker replied with calm determination that suggested he had faced similar threats in his own galaxy. However, Force abilities provide advantages against corrupted opponents that conventional weapons cannot match. The darkness that empowers them also makes them vulnerable to light-based attacks. The claim that Jedi abilities might provide specific advantages against chaos corruption was intriguing from a tactical perspective, though I remained skeptical about deploying untested capabilities against enemies whose dark powers had destroyed entire Imperial armies. "Permission granted," I decided, recognizing that desperate circumstances justified experimental tactics. "But you will operate under direct Imperial command and withdraw immediately if ordered." "Understood, Inquisitor," Skywalker replied. "May the Force be with us all." The battle that followed challenged every assumption I had developed about the relationship between technological superiority and combat effectiveness. The Rebel Alliance fleet engaged Chaos vessels with weapons that operated according to principles beyond Imperial understanding, achieving hit rates and penetration effects that exceeded anything in our tactical databases. "Rebel vessels are maintaining perfect formation despite Chaos psychic attacks," reported the fleet commander, his voice filled with admiration for tactics that defied conventional wisdom about void warfare. "Their shields are somehow immune to the reality distortion effects that typically disable Imperial equipment during Chaos engagements." The immunity to Chaos psychic assault that Imperial forces were observing suggested that Rebel technology incorporated principles that provided protection against warp-based attacks. If such defensive capabilities could be reverse-engineered or adapted for Imperial use, they would revolutionize humanity's ability to resist Chaos influence. "Luke Skywalker has deployed to the surface," reported Captain Mordian, his tactical displays showing individual combat actions that normally wouldn't be visible at fleet command level. "His lightsaber is Emperor's throne. He's cutting through Chaos Space Marines like they're unarmored cultists." The combat effectiveness that Captain Mordian was describing exceeded every projection for individual warrior capability against Chaos-enhanced opponents. Chaos Space Marines were among the most dangerous enemies in the galaxy, possessing strength, speed, and durability that could overwhelm entire squads of Imperial Guard or even pose threats to Loyalist Astartes. "Visual confirmation of Jedi combat performance," announced the technical officer responsible for battlefield surveillance. "Master Skywalker is demonstrating capabilities that appear to specifically counter Chaos corruption. His Force abilities are disrupting demon weapons and protective wards that normally provide supernatural protection." Through enhanced viewing systems, I could see Luke Skywalker moving across the battlefield with fluid grace that allowed him to evade attacks from multiple Chaos Space Marines simultaneously. His lightsaber cut through Chaos armor and weapons with efficiency that suggested the energy blade possessed properties specifically designed to counter dark corruption. "Most remarkably," the surveillance officer continued, "his presence appears to be strengthening Imperial forces in his vicinity. Guard regiments that were falling back against Chaos assault are rallying and counterattacking with effectiveness that exceeds their normal capabilities." The morale effect that Skywalker was having on Imperial troops suggested that Jedi abilities provided benefits beyond individual combat effectiveness. If Force powers could indeed inspire and strengthen normal human forces, single Jedi might be capable of influencing battles through inspirational leadership rather than direct combat alone. Inquisitor, reported Epistolary Aurelius through Secure Vox. I'm detecting something unprecedented. The Jedi's Force abilities are somehow purifying areas of chaos corruption. Locations where he has fought are showing reduced warp disturbance and elimination of lingering taint. The purification effect that Aurelius was describing represented capabilities that exceeded those of the most powerful Imperial psychers or consecrated weapons. If Jedi abilities could indeed cleanse chaos corruption from affected areas, they might provide solutions to contamination problems that had plagued Imperial civilization for millennia. Lord Castellan Creed, I addressed the Fortress World's commander. What assessment can you provide of overall battle progress? The combination of Rebel fleet support and Jedi ground operations is achieving results that exceed our most optimistic projections, Creed replied, his voice carrying surprise that spoke to the magnitude of what was occurring. Chaos forces are withdrawing from positions they had held for hours, and several of their supporting demon entities have been banished or destroyed outright. The tactical success that Creed was reporting validated theories about Rebel military capabilities, while raising questions about the long-term implications of cooperation with forces whose abilities exceeded Imperial standard capabilities. If such cooperation proved sustainable, it might revolutionize humanity's prospects for ultimate victory against chaos threats. Movement from the Chaos Fleet, announced the fleet commander with new urgency. Cranon the Relentless himself is deploying to the surface. All Imperial forces are ordered to maintain maximum distance from his position. The deployment of the Demon Prince, who led the Crimson Slaughter, represented escalation to threat levels that typically required entire Space Marine companies to address. Cranon possessed dark gifts that exceeded those of normal Chaos Space Marines by orders of magnitude, while his Demon Prince status granted capabilities that approached those of minor Chaos gods. Master Skywalker, I transmitted through Priority Vox. Chaos leadership is deploying to your area. The Demon Prince Cranon possesses power levels that exceed anything you've previously encountered. Recommend immediate withdrawal to safe distance. Understood, Inquisitor, Skywalker replied, though his tone suggested he had no intention of withdrawing. However, I sense that this Cranon is connected to the artifact the Chaos forces seek. Defeating him may be the only way to prevent their mission success. The confrontation between Jedi and Demon Prince that followed challenged everything Imperial doctrine taught about individual combat capability against chaos-enhanced opponents. Through long-range surveillance, I watched Luke Skywalker face an enemy whose power had been growing for centuries through communion with the dark gods of chaos. Cranon the Relentless stood nearly 4 meters tall, his form a blend of Space Marine physiology and demonic enhancement that radiated corruption visible to normal human perception. His weapons were artifacts of dark power that could cleave through Imperial armor as if it were cloth, while his very presence created reality distortions that made conventional tactics ineffective. Yet Skywalker met the Demon Prince's assault with techniques that seemed specifically designed to counter chaos corruption. His lightsaber parried attacks from weapons that should have been unstoppable, while his Force abilities enabled him to evade assaults that moved faster than human reflexes could detect. Impossible, breathed Epistolary Aurelius as he monitored the confrontation through psychic senses. The Jedi is not just resisting chaos corruption, he's actively reversing it. Cranon's demon gifts are being neutralized by proximity to Force abilities. The effect that Aurelius was describing represented capabilities that exceeded those of the most powerful Grey Knights or other Imperial demon hunters. If Jedi abilities could indeed neutralize the dark gifts that made demon princes so dangerous, they might provide solutions to threats that Imperial forces had considered permanently beyond human capability to address. The battle continued for nearly an hour, with Skywalker gradually forcing Cranon to retreat through combination of superior tactics and abilities that proved unexpectedly effective against chaos corruption. When the Demon Prince finally attempted to withdraw through Warp Portal, The Jedi's final assault disrupted the translation process and banished Krenan back to the Eye of Terror in defeat. "Chaos forces are withdrawing," reported Lord Castellan Creed, his voice filled with disbelief at what had been accomplished. "The Crimson Slaughter is abandoning their assault and returning to the Eye of Terror. We have achieved complete tactical victory with casualties far below projected levels." The success that Creed was announcing represented more than simple military victory. It demonstrated that cooperation between Imperial and Rebel forces could achieve results that exceeded what either civilization could accomplish independently. Whether such cooperation could be sustained despite fundamental political differences remained to be determined. As the immediate crisis passed and analysis of the battle began, I reflected on the implications of what I had witnessed. The rebels had proven that their capabilities extended far beyond simple technological superiority to encompass tactical and supernatural advantages that could revolutionize Imperial military effectiveness. Yet their democratic ideals and recruitment of Imperial defectors suggested that their presence might ultimately prove more destabilizing than beneficial, regardless of their military value. The question of whether the Imperium could adapt to coexistence with superior forces whose political philosophy challenged fundamental assumptions about the necessity for absolute authority remained unanswered. The galaxy had become far more complex than Imperial doctrine had prepared us to handle, and the choices we made regarding these rebels would determine humanity's future in ways that extended far beyond simple military alliance. Chapter 5: The Democratic Contagion. Within weeks of the successful defense against the Crimson Slaughter, reports began flooding in from across the Cadia system of Imperial personnel, requesting transfers to serve alongside Rebel Alliance forces. What started as isolated incidents of individual defection rapidly evolved into organized groups of Imperial Guard regiments, Navy crews, and even Adeptus Mechanicus tech adepts, formally petitioning for permission to join what they described as more enlightened service to humanity's protection. The scope of defection was unprecedented in Imperial history. Typically, Imperial personnel who abandoned their posts faced execution for desertion or corruption. But these individuals were not fleeing service. They were seeking to serve the same objectives through what they perceived as superior methods and principles. The philosophical implications challenged fundamental assumptions about loyalty, authority, and the nature of proper governance. Inquisitor Vorn. Lord Castellan Creed's voice carried the strain of someone facing administrative crisis that exceeded normal military planning. "We're receiving formal requests from 17 Guard regiments for transfer to Rebel Alliance Command. These aren't cases of desertion or corruption. They're organized political movements based on exposure to alternative governance concepts." I reviewed the files that Creed had forwarded, noting that the requests came from units with exemplary service records and no previous incidents of disloyalty or heretical thinking. These were veteran soldiers who had served the Imperium faithfully for decades, yet they were now formally requesting permission to serve under alien command. "What reasons do they cite for these transfer requests?" I asked, recognizing that understanding their motivations would be critical for developing responses that preserved Imperial authority without triggering widespread rebellion. They described Rebel Alliance service as fighting for freedom rather than mere survival, and claim that exposure to democratic principles has shown them alternatives to what they call necessary oppression, Creed replied, his expression reflecting someone whose fundamental assumptions about soldier motivation were being challenged. The language that Imperial personnel were using to justify their defection requests revealed sophisticated political thinking that went far beyond simple dissatisfaction with conditions of service. They were making philosophical arguments about the nature of legitimate authority and individual autonomy that challenged core assumptions about Imperial governance. Colonel Voss of the 47th Cadian Shock Troops has requested immediate meeting to discuss his regiment's formal petition, Creed continued. He claims to represent not just his own unit, but a coalition of senior officers who have concluded that cooperation with the rebels offers superior opportunities for protecting humanity. The involvement of senior officers in organized defection movements was particularly concerning from a security perspective. These were individuals with access to classified information, detailed knowledge of Imperial tactical doctrine and command authority that could influence thousands of subordinate personnel. Schedule the meeting, I decided, recognizing that direct communication with defection leaders would provide the best opportunity for understanding and potentially containing the ideological threat they represented. Full security protocols, with preparation for immediate containment if they demonstrate signs of corruption or treasonous intent. The meeting took place in the same chamber where I had initially interrogated Mon Mothma, though the atmosphere was entirely different. Colonel Voss entered with the bearing of someone making formal presentation to superior authority rather than someone attempting to hide treasonous activity. His uniform remained immaculate, his deportment entirely proper, yet his words would challenge everything Imperial doctrine taught about proper loyalty. "Inquisitor Vorn," Colonel Voss began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone presenting logical arguments rather than emotional appeals. "I am here to formally request transfer of the 47th Cadian shock troops to Rebel Alliance Command, along with 17 other Guard units that have concluded that such service better fulfills our oath to protect humanity." The claim that serving under alien command could better fulfill Imperial military oaths was heretical by definition. Yet Voss presented it with the calm rationality of someone making routine administrative request. The psychological profile was unlike anything I had encountered in 2 centuries of investigating heretical movements. "Colonel, your oath of service was sworn to the Emperor and the Imperium," I reminded him, using formal language to emphasize the gravity of what he was proposing. "Transfer to alien command represents fundamental violation of that oath, regardless of your stated motivations." "With respect, Inquisitor, our oath was to protect humanity from its enemies and preserve human civilization," Voss replied, his response suggesting careful consideration of legal and theological implications. "We have concluded that the Rebel Alliance's methods and objectives align more closely with that fundamental purpose than current Imperial doctrine." The sophistication of Voss's argument revealed exposure to political philosophy that went far beyond normal Imperial military education. Someone had been teaching these personnel concepts of legitimate authority and individual responsibility that challenged hierarchical command structures. "Explain this conclusion," I demanded, recognizing that understanding their reasoning would be critical for developing responses to similar defection movements that might spread across the sector. "Inquisitor, service alongside Rebel Alliance forces has demonstrated that effective military organization doesn't require the suppression of individual thought and initiative that characterizes Imperial command doctrine," Voss explained, his words carrying conviction that suggested genuine belief rather than mere rationalization. "Their democratic decision-making processes enable rapid adaptation to changing tactical situations, while their respect for individual autonomy motivates superior performance from personnel who feel valued rather than merely commanded," he continued, outlining advantages that contradicted Imperial assumptions about the necessity for absolute obedience. The tactical analysis that Voss was providing challenged fundamental assumptions about military efficiency and command effectiveness. Imperial doctrine held that absolute obedience was necessary for coordination under combat stress, yet these personnel claim to have observed superior performance from democratic military organization. "Colonel, democratic decision-making processes are inherently slow and inefficient," I countered, citing established Imperial military theory. "Combat situations require immediate response to command authority rather than debate about optimal tactics. Our experience suggests otherwise, Inquisitor," Voss replied with confidence that spoke to direct observation rather than theoretical analysis. "Rebel Alliance units demonstrate superior tactical flexibility because individual personnel are trained to think independently and adapt to unexpected situations rather than simply following predetermined protocols." The claim that independent thinking could improve military effectiveness contradicted millennia of Imperial experience with the necessity for discipline and coordination. Yet the recent battle against the Crimson Slaughter had indeed demonstrated Rebel tactical capabilities that exceeded Imperial standard performance. "What guarantees can you provide that exposure to alien command won't result in corruption or gradual erosion of loyalty to humanity?" I asked. focusing on the security concerns that made such defection potentially treasonous, regardless of stated motivations. The Rebel Alliance has demonstrated consistent commitment to protecting human life and opposing tyrannical authority, Voss replied. Their track record of liberating oppressed populations while maintaining democratic governance suggests that service under their command would strengthen rather than weaken commitment to humanity's welfare. The political philosophy that Voss was expressing revealed sophisticated understanding of governance theory that went far beyond normal imperial military education. The concepts he was discussing, legitimate authority, democratic accountability, individual rights, were exactly the kind of heretical thinking that imperial doctrine was designed to prevent. Colonel, you're describing political concepts that have historically led to rebellion, chaos, and the collapse of human civilization, I observed, citing imperial historical analysis of democratic movements. Individual autonomy and questioning of authority create the weakness that humanity's enemies exploit to destroy us. Inquisitor, our observation of Rebel Alliance operations suggests that properly implemented democratic principles actually strengthen resistance to corruption and external manipulation, Voss countered, his response indicating exposure to sophisticated political theory. Personnel who understand and consent to their service are more resistant to psychological warfare and ideological subversion than those who simply follow orders without comprehension, he explained, outlining advantages that imperial doctrine had never systematically considered. The argument that Voss was presenting suggested that imperial assumptions about the relationship between obedience and resistance to corruption might be fundamentally flawed. If democratic principles could indeed strengthen rather than weaken resistance to enemy influence, it would require complete re-evaluation of imperial governance theory. What specific examples can you cite of superior rebel performance compared to imperial standard capabilities? I asked, hoping to separate actual tactical advantages from ideological propaganda. During the recent Chaos Assault, Rebel Alliance units demonstrated coordination and adaptability that enabled them to achieve objectives that would have required far larger imperial forces, Voss replied, citing observations that aligned with my own tactical analysis. More significantly, their personnel showed resistance to chaos psychological warfare that exceeded anything in imperial training protocols, he continued. Democratic education appears to provide mental frameworks that make individuals less susceptible to authoritarian manipulation, whether from external enemies or internal corruption. The claim that democratic education could provide resistance to chaos corruption was particularly disturbing from an imperial security perspective. If true, it suggested that imperial authoritarian methods might actually increase, rather than decrease, vulnerability to the very threats they were designed to prevent. Colonel, what response do you expect from imperial authorities regarding these transfer requests? I asked, hoping to assess whether these personnel understood the gravity of what they were proposing. We recognize that our requests may be denied or that we may face charges of sedition, Voss replied, with the calm acceptance of someone who had carefully considered potential consequences. However, we believe that formal presentation of our position provides the best opportunity for peaceful resolution of philosophical differences. The political sophistication that Voss was demonstrating suggested that these defection movements were being coordinated by individuals with extensive understanding of imperial law and administrative procedures. They were attempting to work within existing systems rather than simply abandoning their posts, which made their challenge to imperial authority far more dangerous than simple rebellion. Inquisitor, Voss continued, we would like to propose an alternative arrangement that might address imperial security concerns while allowing personnel to serve according to their conscience and judgment. Explain this proposal, I demanded, recognizing that any compromise with defection movements would set precedents that could destabilize imperial authority across multiple sectors. Establishment of integrated units that combine imperial command structure with Rebel Alliance tactical methods and democratic decision-making processes, Voss replied, outlining concepts that would require fundamental changes to imperial military doctrine. Such units would remain under formal imperial command while incorporating governance principles that respect individual autonomy and encourage independent thinking within established parameters, he explained, describing hybrid organizations that challenge basic assumptions about military hierarchy. The proposal that Voss was presenting represented exactly the kind of gradual subversion that Imperial doctrine existed to prevent. Creating democratic Imperial units would inevitably lead to questioning of broader Imperial authority and eventual challenge to the absolute obedience necessary for humanity's survival. Colonel, what you're proposing represents fundamental alteration of Imperial military doctrine, based on exposure to alien political philosophy, I observed. Such changes would require authorization from the highest levels of Imperial authority and comprehensive analysis of long-term security implications. We understand the magnitude of what we're requesting, Inquisitor, Voss replied. However, we believe that the tactical advantages demonstrated by Rebel Alliance methods justify serious consideration of adaptation rather than rigid adherence to doctrine that may no longer be optimal for humanity's protection. The reasoned approach that Voss was taking to proposing radical changes made his challenge to Imperial authority far more dangerous than simple rebellion or heretical corruption. He was making logical arguments based on observed tactical advantages rather than emotional appeals or obvious ideological subversion. As our meeting continued, I began to realize that the Rebel Alliance represented a threat unlike any that Imperial doctrine had prepared us to address. Rather than attempting to conquer or destroy Imperial civilization, they were offering alternatives that some Imperial personnel found genuinely attractive based on tactical effectiveness and philosophical appeal. Whether the Imperium could adapt to such challenges without compromising the absolute authority necessary for humanity's survival remained an open question. But I was beginning to suspect that these democratic ideas might prove more dangerous to Imperial stability than any military threat the rebels could pose. The galaxy was changing in ways that would test every assumption about governance, loyalty, and the nature of legitimate authority. The choices we made in response would determine whether humanity emerged stronger or faced internal collapse from ideas that challenged the very foundations of Imperial civilization. Chapter 6. The Council's Dilemma. The emergency session of the Cadian High Command convened 3 days after Colonel Voss's formal presentation, bringing together military leaders, Adeptus Mechanicus representatives, ecclesiarchy officials, and Inquisition personnel to address what was rapidly becoming the most significant internal security crisis in the sector's history. The reports flooding in from across Cadia and neighboring systems painted a picture of ideological contamination, spreading faster than any biological or psychic corruption the Imperium had previously encountered. Lord Castellan Creed stood before the assembled authorities, his weathered features reflecting someone grappling with challenges that exceeded conventional military planning. Gentlemen, we face a situation that our doctrine provides no clear guidance for addressing. 17 Guard regiments, 43 Navy vessels, and over 200 Adeptus Mechanicus personnel have formally requested transfer to Rebel Alliance Command. These aren't cases of desertion or corruption. They're organized political movements based on philosophical evaluation of service options. The scope of defection that Creed was describing exceeded anything in Imperial history since the Horus heresy itself. Yet the nature of the challenge was entirely different. These personnel weren't rebelling against Imperial authority. They were requesting permission to serve humanity's protection through what they perceived as superior methods and organization. Lord General Cadia of the 19th Army Group reports similar movements across 4 neighboring systems, Creed continued, consulting data that painted an increasingly alarming picture. Total personnel involved now exceeds 200,000 individuals, including senior officers with access to classified tactical information and strategic planning. The involvement of senior personnel with classified access created security implications that went far beyond simple loss of manpower. If these officers provided tactical intelligence to the rebels, it could compromise Imperial defensive capabilities across multiple sectors while potentially providing aliens with detailed knowledge of human military capabilities. Fabricator General Haskell, Creed addressed the senior Adeptus Mechanicus representative. What analysis can you provide regarding the technological aspects of this situation? The ancient tech priest activated holographic displays that showed comparative analyses of Imperial and Rebel technology, his mechanical consciousness processing data that challenged established understanding of proper technological development. Lord Castellan, exposure to Rebel Alliance technology has revealed capabilities that exceed Imperial standards in multiple critical areas. Haskell manipulated the displays to show specific examples of technological superiority that would be attractive to technically minded personnel. Their energy generation, computing systems, and manufacturing processes operate at efficiency levels that suggest civilizational advancement beyond anything achieved during humanity's dark age of technology. The tech priest paused, his optical sensors focusing on data that apparently disturbed his mechanical sensibilities. Most significantly, their artificial intelligence development has proceeded without the catastrophic rebellion that Imperial doctrine teaches is an inevitable result of uncontrolled AI advancement. They appear to have achieved harmonious cooperation between organic and artificial consciousness. The theological implications of successful AI development challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between human and machine consciousness that had guided Imperial technology policy for millennia. If the rebels had indeed achieved stable AI cooperation, it suggested possibilities for technological advancement that Imperial doctrine had considered permanently forbidden. Cardinal Vex, Creed addressed the ecclesiarchy representative. What theological assessment can you provide regarding the spiritual implications of these defection movements? The elderly cardinal activated displays that showed analysis conducted by the most senior theologians in Imperial service, their conclusions challenging assumptions about faith, loyalty, and proper spiritual development. Lord Castellan, the defecting personnel show no signs of spiritual corruption or loss of faith in the Emperor's protection. Cardinal Vex manipulated the displays to show psychological profiles that contradicted normal patterns of heretical development. Instead, they express belief that democratic principles and individual autonomy represent more faithful implementation of the Emperor's original vision for humanity than current Imperial governance provides. The theological interpretation that Cardinal Vex was presenting suggested that these personnel were justifying their defection through sophisticated analysis of Imperial religious doctrine rather than rejection of Imperial faith. Such reasoning made their challenge to authority far more dangerous than simple heretical rebellion. They cite the Emperor's establishment of the Imperial truth and his opposition to religious tyranny as evidence that current Imperial doctrine represents deviation from his original intentions, Vex continued, outlining arguments that would be difficult to refute through normal theological education. Inquisitor Vorn, Creed addressed me directly. Your analysis of the Rebel Alliance leadership suggests that their influence extends beyond simple military cooperation. What assessment can you provide regarding their long-term objectives and potential threat to Imperial stability? I activated my own displays, showing intelligence gathered through months of observation and interaction with Rebel personnel. Lord Castellan, the Rebels represent a fundamentally different approach to governance and military organization that challenges basic assumptions about the necessity for absolute authority in a hostile galaxy. Their democratic decision-making processes, respect for individual autonomy, and integration of advanced technology with ethical constraints suggests civilizational development along paths that Imperial doctrine has never systematically explored, I continued, outlining capabilities that exceeded simple military advantage. Most concerning from a security perspective, their methods appear to be genuinely effective for achieving objectives that align with Imperial goals, protecting human life, resisting tyrannical authority, and maintaining technological advancement without catastrophic corruption, I explained, describing advantages that made their political philosophy attractive rather than obviously heretical. The question becomes whether the Imperium can adapt to coexistence with superior forces whose political philosophy challenges fundamental assumptions about governance, or whether we must treat them as existential threats regardless of their demonstrated commitment to protecting humanity, I concluded, outlining the strategic dilemma that would determine the sector's future. Tech Dominus Corvanis stepped forward, his mechanical form radiating the authority of someone whose analysis carried significant weight within Adeptus Mechanicus hierarchy. Colleagues, I have conducted extensive analysis of the technological enhancement that results from cooperation with Rebel Alliance forces. Corvinus activated displays that showed performance improvements documented across multiple Imperial units that had worked alongside Rebel personnel. Equipment efficiency increases by average of 37%. Combat effectiveness improves by measures that exceed theoretical maximum performance, and most remarkably, resistance to chaos corruption shows statistically significant strengthening. The technological analysis that Corvinus was presenting provided strong evidence that cooperation with the rebels produced measurable advantages that exceeded simple access to superior equipment. The enhancement of Imperial capabilities through exposure to rebel methods suggested synergistic effects that neither civilization could achieve independently. However, Corvinus continued, his mechanical voice carrying warnings that reflected deep concern about long-term implications. Such enhancement appears to be dependent on adoption of rebel political and organizational principles. Personnel who maintain purely Imperial mindsets show minimal improvement, while those who embrace democratic concepts demonstrate maximum benefit. The correlation between political philosophy and technological effectiveness that Corvinus was describing suggested that rebel advantages might require fundamental changes to Imperial culture and governance rather than simple technical cooperation. Such requirements would challenge the absolute authority that Imperial doctrine taught was necessary for humanity's survival. Lord Castellan, interjected Captain Mordian, we're receiving priority communications from neighboring sectors reporting similar defection movements following contact with Rebel Alliance vessels. The ideological contamination is spreading faster than our ability to contain it. The expansion of defection movements to neighboring sectors confirmed that rebel influence represented threat levels that exceeded anything addressed by standard Imperial security protocols. If such movements continued to spread, they could destabilize Imperial authority across entire segmentums. What options do we have for containing this situation? Creed asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone recognizing that conventional solutions might prove inadequate for addressing unprecedented challenges. Military suppression of defection movements would require treating loyal Imperial personnel as enemies, which could trigger the very rebellion we seek to prevent, observed General Cadia. However, accommodation of defection requests would set precedents that could encourage similar movements throughout Imperial space. The tactical analysis that Cadia was providing outlined the fundamental dilemma posed by personnel who were simultaneously loyal to Imperial objectives and opposed to Imperial methods. Traditional responses to internal threats were designed for clear cases of rebellion or corruption, rather than organized political movements seeking alternative service arrangements. Inquisitor Vorn, Cardinal Vex addressed me directly. What recommendations can you provide for addressing this situation from theological and security perspectives? The question touched upon responsibilities that exceeded my normal authorization as Ordo Xenos personnel. Yet the unprecedented nature of the situation required analysis that transcended standard jurisdictional boundaries. Cardinal, we face challenges that require adaptation of Imperial doctrine to address realities that our predecessors never encountered. The Rebel Alliance represents superior technological capabilities, effective military organization, and political philosophy that attracts Imperial personnel through demonstrated advantages rather than obvious corruption, I continued, outlining the complexity of threat assessment when dealing with aliens whose capabilities exceeded human standards. Standard responses based on assumed alien hostility or inherent inferiority are inadequate for addressing forces whose methods may actually provide better protection for humanity than current Imperial doctrine, I explained, describing the need for strategic thinking that went beyond traditional xenological categories. However, accommodation of rebel political philosophy would require fundamental changes to Imperial governance that could destabilize the absolute authority necessary for coordinating resistance to genuine threats, I concluded, outlining the central contradiction that made simple solutions impossible. What specific recommendations do you propose? Creed demanded, recognizing that analysis without actionable solutions would be inadequate for addressing immediate crisis. Establishment of limited cooperation protocols that enable joint operations against mutual threats while maintaining Imperial command authority over Imperial personnel, I replied, outlining compromise approaches that might address security concerns while preventing widespread rebellion. Creation of integrated research programs that study rebel technological and organizational methods for potential adaptation to Imperial use, without wholesale adoption of their political philosophy, I continued, describing possibilities for gaining advantages without compromising fundamental Imperial principles. Most importantly, direct communication with the highest levels of Imperial authority to obtain guidance for addressing challenges that exceed sector-level authorization, I concluded, recognizing that the decisions required would affect the entire Imperium rather than just local security concerns. The discussion that followed encompassed possibilities and risks that challenged every assumption about proper Imperial response to alien contact. Whether the solutions we developed would preserve Imperial authority while gaining the advantages of cooperation with superior forces remained to be determined. But I was beginning to suspect that the choices we made regarding the Rebel Alliance would determine not just the fate of the Cadia sector, but the future direction of Imperial civilization itself. The galaxy was changing, and humanity would either adapt or face consequences that could prove more catastrophic than any external threat we had previously encountered. Chapter 7: Integration Experiments. 6 months after the initial crisis, Lord Castellan Creed authorized the most audacious experiment in Imperial military history, the creation of integrated tactical units that combined Imperial command structure with Rebel Alliance operational methods. The first Cadian Alliance composite regiment would serve as testbed for determining whether democratic principles could be safely incorporated into Imperial military organization without compromising the absolute authority necessary for humanity's survival. Colonel Voss had been selected to command the experimental unit, his combination of Imperial training and exposure to Rebel methods making him ideal for bridging philosophical differences between the two civilizations. Under his leadership, 500 Imperial Guard personnel would work alongside 300 Rebel Alliance soldiers in operations designed to test the practical implications of democratic military organization. Inquisitor Vorn, Colonel Voss reported during our weekly review of integration progress, the preliminary results exceed even optimistic projections for cooperation between forces with fundamentally different organizational principles. I reviewed the tactical analyses that Voss had prepared, noting performance metrics that challenged basic assumptions about military efficiency and command effectiveness. Colonel, describe the specific advantages you've observed from democratic decision-making processes. Individual initiative has increased dramatically when personnel understand the strategic reasoning behind their orders rather than simply following commands without comprehension, Voss replied, outlining benefits that contradicted Imperial doctrine about the necessity for unquestioning obedience. Tactical adaptation to unexpected situations improves when squad leaders are trained to think independently and modify plans based on local conditions rather than adhering to predetermined protocols regardless of changing circumstances. He continued, describing capabilities that exceeded standard Imperial tactical flexibility. The advantages that Voss was describing aligned with theoretical benefits of democratic organization, yet they challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between obedience and military effectiveness. If individual initiative could indeed improve, rather than compromise tactical coordination, it would require complete re-evaluation of Imperial training methods. What specific examples can you provide of superior performance compared to standard Imperial units? I asked, hoping to separate actual tactical improvements from ideological bias in favor of democratic methods. During the recent anti-pirate operation in the Mordian system, the composite regiment achieved objectives with 60% fewer casualties than projected for equivalent standard Imperial forces, Voss replied, citing results that exceeded normal performance variations. More significantly, the democratic planning process enabled identification of tactical options that traditional command structure would never have considered, resulting in complete mission success rather than the acceptable losses that Imperial doctrine typically accepts, he explained, describing outcomes that suggested systematic rather than circumstantial advantages. The performance improvements that Voss was documenting provided strong evidence that democratic methods could indeed enhance military effectiveness under specific conditions. However, the long-term implications for imperial authority and discipline remained concerning from a security perspective. Tech Adept Corvanis, I addressed the Mechanicus representative assigned to monitor technological aspects of the integration experiment. What analysis can you provide regarding equipment performance and machine spirit behavior in integrated units? Corvanis activated displays that showed comparative analyses of equipment efficiency across multiple operational parameters. Inquisitor, the machine spirits of equipment assigned to integrated units demonstrate enhanced performance that correlates directly with the democratic decision-making processes of their operators. The Tech Adept manipulated the displays to show specific examples of technological improvement that defied normal patterns of machine spirit behavior. Most remarkably, equipment operated by personnel trained in democratic principles shows increased resistance to chaos corruption and enhanced coordination with Rebel Alliance technology. The correlation between political philosophy and technological performance that Corvanis was describing suggested that the benefits of democratic organization extended beyond simple human psychological factors to encompass fundamental relationships between consciousness and material systems. What theoretical framework can explain such correlation? I asked, recognizing that understanding the mechanisms involved would be critical for evaluating long-term implications of integration experiments. Preliminary analysis suggests that democratic decision-making creates mental patterns that enhance harmony between human consciousness and machine spirit awareness, Corvanis replied, outlining theories that challenged established understanding of human-machine interaction. Personnel who understand and consent to their orders appear to generate psychic resonances that strengthen rather than conflict with machine spirit operations, resulting in enhanced performance that exceeds simple technical optimization, he explained, describing effects that transcended normal categories of technological enhancement. The psychological mechanisms that Corvanis was proposing suggested that imperial authoritarian methods might actually interfere with optimal human-machine cooperation, while democratic approaches could unlock performance potential that had never been systematically explored. Captain Solo, I addressed the Rebel Alliance representative assigned to coordinate their participation in integration experiments. What assessment can your people provide regarding the effectiveness of combined operations? The former smuggler turned military advisor had proven surprisingly capable at bridging cultural differences between Imperial and Rebel personnel. His pragmatic approach to problem-solving enabling cooperation despite fundamental philosophical disagreements. Inquisitor, the integration is working better than anyone expected, Solo replied with characteristic directness. Your people are adapting to democratic methods faster than we thought possible, while our personnel are learning valuable lessons about discipline and coordination from Imperial training. Solo activated tactical displays that showed performance comparisons between integrated units and standard forces from both civilizations. The combined capabilities exceed what either organization could achieve independently, suggesting that cooperation provides genuine synergistic advantages rather than simple combination of existing strengths. The tactical analysis that Solo was presenting supported theories about democratic military organization while demonstrating practical benefits that exceeded ideological considerations. If such cooperation could be sustained and expanded, it might revolutionize Imperial military capabilities. However, Solo continued, his expression reflecting concern about long-term sustainability of cooperation arrangements, there are fundamental philosophical differences that create ongoing tension between Imperial and Rebel personnel. Imperial training emphasizes absolute obedience and acceptance of authority without question, while Rebel methods require individual judgment and willingness to challenge orders that seem tactically unsound, he explained, describing conflicts that could potentially undermine unit cohesion. The philosophical tensions that Solo was identifying represented the core challenge of integrating democratic methods with Imperial authority structures. Such conflicts might be manageable in experimental units with carefully selected personnel, but they could prove devastating if scaled to broader Imperial military organization. What specific incidents have occurred that illustrate these tensions? I asked, hoping to understand the practical implications of philosophical disagreements between Imperial and Rebel approaches to military service. Imperial personnel sometimes follow orders that Rebel troops consider tactically unsound, while Rebel personnel occasionally question commands that Imperial training teaches should be obeyed without discussion, Solo replied, outlining conflicts that reflected deeper disagreements about legitimate authority. Most concerning, some Imperial personnel are beginning to question broader Imperial authority based on their exposure to democratic decision-making processes, he continued, describing exactly the kind of ideological contamination that Imperial security protocols existed to prevent. The expansion of democratic thinking beyond the experimental units represented the primary security concern about integration experiments. If exposure to Rebel methods indeed encouraged questioning of Imperial authority, it could trigger rebellion movements that would destabilize civilization across multiple sectors. Luke Skywalker, I addressed the Jedi who had been assigned to monitor Force-related aspects of integration experiments. What insights can your abilities provide regarding the psychological and spiritual effects of democratic military organization?